So we are now just right at 10 a.m. and we are going to start. I love being on time. We are going to start right now, and I would like to introduce you to a very talented and experienced production designer named Margot Reddy. Margot has been working in film as a designer and art director for 18 years after graduating from architecture school. That's just an incredibly wonderful addition to that skill set that she has, coming from an architecture background. That's amazing for production design. So she graduated holding Royal Architectural Institute of Canada Gold Medal in Design. Recent credits of Margot's include being a production designer on NBC Universal's series The Magician, being art director on a Steven Spielberg film called The BFG. And Margot believes that production design is the fine art of visual storytelling. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Margot, who is going to talk to you about her area of expertise. Margot, are you ready to take it over?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Wonderful.
Good to go. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. And I think it's quite interesting that we're talking about production design first, because I think it is one of those very important to the feel and mood of a TV series or film, but not something that we always talk about as kind of a separate thing. We spend a lot of time talking about directing and writing and cinematography. I think lately production design is a little more on the landscape as its own thing, and its importance is being understood and discussed. But I think it's interesting to start, because I feel like production design does influence the second we look at anything filmed. We are aware of production design, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. I think it affects how we feel about it. It is, like I was saying, and thank you for the intro, it is the art of visual storytelling, because we are very much involved in underscoring what the director and writers are trying to say with visuals. So what is a production designer? It's interesting. The term actually did not exist in the early days of the film industry. It was invented on a giant film, which I'm sure we've all seen, called Gone with the Wind. The production designer was someone named William Menzies. And prior to that giant, very visually rich, complicated film, all of the visual departments on the show were actually separate departments. So you had an art department that did sets, you had set deck that did sort of the interior design for the film. And I'll go on about what those departments are. But for that film, they sort of created almost like an Uber person, the production designer, who was in charge, and this is what we do, overlooking the entire visuals of the show, with the exception of costumes and lighting. So costumes, the costume designer is a separate department, and lighting is, of course, sort of overseen by the director of photography. So we are technically not really a department. We're above the line, and we oversee 7 departments, and we coordinate with the director and the producers about what are the visuals of the show, what is the tone, what is the mood, and how do we create that. So I love writing as well. I'm a big fan of writing, and I write myself. So to me, this is the most ideal design job, because it is storytelling with visuals. So in the process of getting a job, we will be one of the earliest people to read a script, which is really fun. Frequently, we'll read the script before we even have the job, and we'll sort of formulate an idea of what we think the visuals are, do some mood boards, which I'll show you shortly, pitch them to everybody, see how they react, and off we go. So from the technical point of view, we are sort of first out the gate with visuals, and we oversee, people will come to talk to you about many of these departments, I think, during the weekend. We oversee the art department, which is kind of, for lack of a better word, like the architects of the shows, people that design and draw sets, and we make modifications to locations. We also oversee the set decorating department, which is like the interior designers of the show. It's furniture. We oversee props, which is things that you hold. I think we all know what props are, guns and Christmas presents and things like that. We also are involved in overseeing construction, paint, greens, which is plants, and special effects to some extent. We will get to review the special effects sort of demos of what they plan to do and talk about how that works with the visual concepts of the film. So that's what we do. It is approximately, a friend of mine recently did a calculation, 60% of the costs and personnel on a large production are under the umbrella of production design. So it's a really fun job. It has a lot of responsibility. I spent many years, as Darlene was saying, many years studying design and working my way into this role. And I love it. It's great. So I'm going to share a screen now with a bunch of images. Oh, I think I need to be allowed to share. I'm going to show you some mood boards of a project I worked on called The Magician. So just while I'm getting there to sharing, I will talk to you a little bit about this wonderful show I got to design for 3 seasons. It is a self-described fantasy about reality. So we have a lot of fantasy worlds, a lot of different timelines. We also have a lot of planet Earth. So designing on that show was a wonderful thing to do, as it got to have such a variety of looks. And here we go. Such a variety of looks and such a variety of concepts. So I'm just gonna grab, whoops. I'm gonna grab some photos here. So it's sort of a dream job for a production designer when you get to do a show that is a fantasy-based show. On the other hand, design is important in every show. There are shows where we almost hope you don't notice the production design. It just helps bring you into a world and you believe that you're there. And if it's done well, it supports the story. There are other shows where, as the designer, you are very much involved in world building and creating a new fantasy world. And this was one of those shows. So our first point of communication with the director and producers is always a mood board. I'm going to walk you through probably the most eccentric and fun set we did on the show, which was called the Muntjac, and it was a boat. It was a magical royal boat that was also a living entity. In the center of the boat is a creature that they called the Heartwood, which is kind of like a convoluted tree that's alive. We went through some discussions of, does the tree have a face? No, that would be too cheesy. Instead, it's kind of got this glowing light core to it. And the tree sort of creates this boat around itself. It's basically to get around. So first thing we did was we bought a boat exterior and we modified it, which was a lot of fun. The picture in the upper left here is a concept of, the red sails. They wanted an animal skeleton on the front. And it's a visual proposal to them. One of the main things in the story is the idea that this is energy between this creature creating a boat. So these sort of Art Nouveau style swirls were an important design concept. So this was my way of sort of taking what was rather a plain boat to begin with and showing how we might make it into our set. This set was much larger on the inside than the outside. We didn't shoot inside the actual boat. We did a stage set. One of the big things of production design is deciding when to shoot practically at a location or when to create a stage set. Stage sets are always a little more money to start with, but a lot more convenient. So we built a much larger stage set and wrote it into the script as to why it was larger on the inside than the outside. We called it a TARDIS, like in Doctor Who, those of you that have seen it, that's sort of magical, that when you go down the stairs, suddenly you're in this much larger interior space. Anyway, so the look of the interior of the set. This is another mood board where I was trying to get to, how do you create something that's kind of naval architecture and repetitive, but also has this like energy, tree-like component to it. So they really liked the feel of these. The ones on the left were a bit too complicated, but they liked the feel of, for instance, the newel post with the sort of swirly growth. So this was a proposal of just the general, what is this set? No one's ever seen a set before that's a tree inside a boat. Another mood board of how do we make this living tree, the heartwood. I was conceptualizing it as almost like a bunch of twisted roots that come up out of the floor, kind of form almost a face, and then create the boat above it. On the right here, there's something that has a face carved in it, and mood boards are always useful for when you've gone too far as well. Everyone was concerned that that might look a little bit too kind of cheesy and on the nose. So we kind of decided that the heartwood instead would have this glowing light at its core. So this is an illustration early in the process. This is a very fun job in the art department. We hire people who are artists to help conceptualize the space, the tone, and the lighting of a set. So we had a wonderful illustrator named Ron Turner who did this. And this was my way of proposing to them, how do we know that it's a boat? Well, we know it's a boat because it has ribs, it has architecture, it has repetition. How do we create the tree in this and have that work with the boat? So this was my way of kind of proposing that the tree grows out of the floor, creates this kind of convoluted trunk, and then grows back into the ceiling and becomes the ribs of the boat. So this also started to address the idea of the light at the core of the tree, which was the lighting department. created this kind of interactive board where they could make the light glow or not, depending on, we never really spoke to the tree, but you could feel its emotions based on the light. And then also, as an example of how mood boards can influence design, we took that idea that I liked of the kind of twisting newel post, put a lantern on top at the stair, and I like to call that the sort of Narnia moment, a little bit magical. And here's a photograph of our lovely cast inside the boat set. As you can see, we did add a lighting element in the tree. I felt that we had been successful in that, and the lighting department did a great job when one of the fans tweeted that they were actually crying during one scene where the tree was sort of distressed during a battle and was doing this sort of pulsing. And I think people really started to believe that it was alive, which was wonderful. And a big kudos to our sculpting department as well, because it is not easy to make anything that's meant to look like it's alive out of foam. It's a lot of work. And here's the newel post that twists into the lantern. So we tend to, if we have a approved illustration and people like the look and feel of it, we try to take it directly into the set as much as we can. Here's a photo of the interior of the set to illustrate the set dressing as well as the construction. So we had a wonderful paint department, beautiful lacquered wood, gave us the feel of an historic boat. We had a great set deck department as well. This is a royal boat, so we have a lot of rich furnishings with velvet and, gilded surfaces. And up here is something that I find important in design is remembering your theme throughout the set. So we had moments where we used the scroll work to remind us of that, the theme of growth. Here's a shot of the deck of the actual boat that we renovated just for fun, to show how we were very careful to add realistic detail, a feeling of use that there were a crew on this boat. And here's a shot of it. Actually, we filmed it practically sailing. We filmed on the deck. We had a secondary crew on a barge following it. Marine filming is always very fun and interesting and a lot of work. So it was probably the most exciting set we did on the show. Here's a shot of another set. I'm going to jump into basically my portfolio to show you some variety of different sets we did and how they all have different looks. Many times, like on the Muntjac, the design is in full light and you're meant to see it all, and it's more about what you see than what you don't see. Something interesting in production design is lighting is very important. We work with the director of photography and the gaffer to talk about lighting. And in this instance, this was this poison library that was abandoned for thousands of years. And in this case, if you saw this set in full light, it wouldn't look like much. It looked like a concrete room with some statues in it and some dust and moss. But because this was one of those chiaroscuro, for the lighting term from painting, it was all about the shadows and the darkness, that many times we create sets that are not. So one of the things I had to learn is different than architecture, is we create sets that aren't meant to be fully seen, that they're punctuated by light. And we think about that and we talk to the director about, what is important here. If this is supposed to look old and ancient, it's quite an interesting challenge for our paint teams and special effects as well, because they would bring in the dust for that. And then I'm going to share my screen one more time and go into my website now to talk a little bit more about all the different looks that we do. Again, using the Magicians as a template and some other shows. So this is an illustration for that set that I just showed you that was very dark and overgrown and with vines and dusty. Different sets we do are occasionally, here's an example of an Art Deco hotel. So this is a very different kind of thing. When you read that it's an Art Deco hotel, the trick is less world building and fantasy, but much more what are the details that make that feel correct, and the scale, and also how do you film in it. So this was actually a match to the Hotel Vancouver in downtown Vancouver, which was very fun. We were very careful about things like cornice details and proportions to feel like we belong in that hotel, because we had scenes where we were walking down this corridor in our stage set and our characters turn the corner and they're actually in the location that we filmed at. So we were careful to match details. We found the most amazing crazy carpet for this room. So this was a moment where an attempt at reality and feeling like we're Hotel Vancouver met with a little bit of fantasy. There was meant to be a scene in here that was meant to be a little bit disturbing in the Shining way. So we had a good time kind of making us feel like we're in the Hotel Vancouver, but at the same time, giving something a little bit poppy and fantasy to that. And many, many times the details are what makes you feel like it's real. I think we've all had experiences of, it's tricky because we work at different budgets. And obviously when you have a gigantic budget, it's easier. And more modest budget shows, it can be challenging. And that is always the trick for us. Most of us have worked in BC on all different kinds of shows, is getting the right feel at whatever budget point you're at. We had a reasonable budget for this set. It wasn't giant. It is a New York penthouse set. So this is a set that I felt I used a lot of my architecture background in creating. This is a set for the characters and the magicians when they first graduate from university, and because they're magicians, they get this amazing apartment, but they get their first amazing apartment together. So it was really fun because I felt I got to use the architecture background. But what was also important in this was to make it feel like it's a real building. So we were very careful. We had a lot of people come in as set designers who were trained in architecture or interior design to help draw it. It was a lovely set, very much fun to get to do. So we were really careful about, you know, the floor looking like real wood, and we had this wonderful staircase that was brass and made it out of real metal. Different sort of occasionally you'll do a set like this that is meant to look like a real building, but because it's for film and TV, you're still telling a story. So a sort of secret theme in this penthouse set was growth, because our characters were growing up. So I was lucky to find this wallpaper that reminded me of water a little bit, and we put some flowers on the wall just to kind of, at times it's nice just to remind the audience, whether people consciously or unconsciously notice it, of the themes underlying your story. So these are just various photos of that. And I feel like I might be close to my 15-minute mark. Maybe Darlene can tell me. I'm just going to share one more thing, which is kind of the opposite in some ways, where this is a set that we built that was meant to look straight real. There's no fantasy component to it. We are in San Francisco. This is relatively well-to-do home. And the challenge was that we burnt it down, part of it, on stage. So this set is actually totally fake. It's meant to look like a real house. You're not meant to blink an eye. You believe that you're in a location. We believe that this is wood trim around the doorways, but in fact, this is fake. This is a fire retardant drywall painted to look like wood. So the magic of the paint department, I always like to say that no matter what a good job design or art direction can do, we really don't have much if we don't have great paint and great lighting. So this is an example. Full kudos to the paint department for making this all feel like a real wood detailed home, when in fact we actually had to burn it on stage, which was an exciting big endeavor involving a lot of people. You'll also note that there's actually a hole in the ceiling in the living room here. Frequently, we don't necessarily have ceilings for lighting. In this case, we didn't have ceilings for the sake of the fire. So we needed a hole there to have the smoke escape, just for safety reasons.
Great.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Margot, your timing was almost perfect. And I think, I hope our audience was as fascinated as I was. This just amazes me. So I loved hearing about your work and how you create these environments. It just boggles my mind. And we do, and also for people who would like to look at Margot's work after, you can find her website at margotready.com. So go and have a visit. She has a fascinating portfolio. So please go check it out. We do have some questions, Margot. So great. From Leon Potter is asking, he says, I'm a set and lighting designer in theater, and I would like to get into production design. How do I transition?
Well, I would say that's a good start, because there's obviously theater sets and film sets are not all that different. I'm sorry, Leon said he would want to get into set design.
He wanted to get into production design and wondering how to transition. And Margot, I think in conjunction with that question, are there credentials that film studios are looking for? So if we're a brand new studio or production company and we're looking to bring someone like you in, what kind of credentials are we looking for? What kind of background?
I think that's a really great question. And the answer is it's complicated. There are a few programs in the world, and very few. I think there's AFI in Los Angeles and one in England that offer a Masters of Production Design program. So I would say that almost everyone in the art department who becomes a production designer tends to have some sort of design education post high school. I have an architecture degree. I would say that that's about half of the art department has an architecture degree, which is applicable but not directly applicable. So to get an architecture degree, you either do an undergrad in architecture and a grad master's in architecture, or you do an undergrad in some other form of fine art and do a master's in architecture. It's a lot of education. It is not wasted. However, there are parts of it that are applicable and parts that aren't. I actually had the great opportunity to teach a little bit at Cap University in their 4-year film program. They're starting to focus a little bit more on production design. I would say right now, it's not quite enough to really step into the art department. To get into the art department of film, you either need to be able to design and draft for set design, which would mean usually an architecture degree or an interior design degree or an architectural technology degree, several years of instruction on drafting, 3D modeling, pre-visualization, rendering, as well as construction drawings. That's one way. Another way is to come in through the graphic stream. The graphic stream is really valid and it works well in the art department. It can be trickier to jump to production design from that because the training of, if you get onto a show where you're building a lot of sets, that's just a bit more of a transition, but that's happened and it's worked well. We do have some people who are trained as industrial designers, which can also work. But my real hope is that my understanding is that we will likely, there'll be an expansion, hopefully. Don't want to speak for them, but I think there's a thought of an expansion of the Cap University 4-year design program, 4-year film degree, having possibly more, being able to stream more, and production design is potentially being one of those streams. I think that would be ideal to have a program like that where we could focus a little bit more on the filmmaking and design. So I guess that's a complicated answer to a simple question, but I think it's something that's in progress now. And I think part of that is because production design in the art department has become so much more complicated over the years. You know, it used to be you just do a 2-wall set and you shoot it. Now we build buildings. I've worked on, I think the BFG, the construction budget was in the neighborhood of $15 or $20 million. So it's getting to be, it depends on the scale of the production you're on, but it can, if people are, by the way, can contact me through my website if anyone wants to ask me more questions about this too.
Okay. Yes, I was kind of curious that you just mentioned there that the industry is evolving so rapidly with technology and the like, and staying abreast of your role within this changing environment must be very challenging. So you've got to be, you're learning all the time, I would assume.
It very much so. And it's interesting because when I was doing more sort of art directing, the bigger features, I felt like I was literally learning so much about visual effects. For instance, on the BFG, we had a ton of motion capture. We had green screens everywhere, set extensions, as well as physical set builds. And then when I sort of stepped from that into art directing, into production designing medium-sized TV shows, we started to build more physical sets again. So the scale of the show depends. On a smaller show, you're going to shoot locations, and that is a more straightforward thing in many ways, but it's harder for the shooting crew because they're crammed into a little space. Medium-sized shows, you tend to build a lot of physical sets. Giant shows do a lot of green screen. A lot of those big shows have a lot of set extensions, like if you're on a Star Trek or a Star Wars feature, you're going to build some sets, but you're also going to be heavily involved in visual effects. So it is fascinating, the breadth of knowledge, and that we're always learning.
Great, wonderful. We also have a question from Dennis Oliver, who wants to know, who instructs what is needed from you, producer or director? How does that work?
Oh, that's a great question, and all of the above. And it depends with the people that you're dealing with. And to some extent, we actually drive the bus a little bit more as well lately, I think, because of the aforementioned complexity of things. There's moments where we have to say, hey, I think that we need to build this set to this point and then go green screen after that for budget reasons or practical reasons. So generally speaking, it's a very much a hive mind, which is the fun of it, very much a collective decision. So we will read the script together, the mood boards will happen, discussions will occur. And, like every kind of group, collective, it depends partly on who's has a tendency to kind of want to drive things. But yeah, so it's all of the above. These days, I would say that television directors on an episodic TV series have less autonomy than feature film directors. On an episodic TV series, you would have a showrunner who oversees everything and some producers and writers who get more involved. Whereas on a feature, the director is still very much the person who's driving the bus.
Okay. And a question from Michael. Are the set builders full-time employees, or do they have part-time jobs in the trades? Do they need trade certificates to work on set?
Oh, that's a great question as well. These are wonderful questions. Film is funny. We're full-time employees until we're not. So we get hired onto a show. I would say that because the rates and wages are quite decent in film, that construction people would tend to do what anyone in the art department would do as well. The days are 10-hour days for construction and 12 for the art department. These are long days. Film was originally conceptualized as a sort of seasonal work, and my recommendation to anyone would be to treat it that way, to take care of yourself between jobs and rest up, because it can be very busy in British Columbia. People could probably work all year round. I would say that construction would be conceptualized as something you would do for 3 to 4 to up to 8 or 9 months on a show and then take a break. But because the pay is solid, that's sort of how it's meant to go. But you are technically self-employed in the sense that between jobs you might tend to hook up with a team that will just keep working, but you also at times will find yourself free floating and looking for new work or a new team. And that's just the reality of the film industry.
Okay, thank you. We have anonymous, somebody asking, Man of Steel is one of my favorite movies. How was it like working on that?
Oh, it was great. I'd say there's a few shows that I really geeked out on. Man of Steel be one of them, and also probably Battlestar Galactica. I love spaceships and science fiction personally. Not by no means probably the most tricky thing to design, actually, because spaceships don't exist the way that we design them. So we're always trying to come up with something that's believable, but also different than the most previous person. Man of Steel was wonderful to work on. It was a wonderfully budgeted production. It was very exciting because we had a lot of really great actors. I got to work on a bunch of the Krypton sets and a couple of the sort of spaceship-y type sets. It's a good example, though. I should probably add this to my website because I think it's interesting that we built the floors and parts of things, but we didn't actually build a lot of the sets in that film. So it was a great example of kind of, I think, good blending between visual effects and sets where you don't actually stare at it. Like I have a 10-year-old who will look at a movie now and go, that's visual effect. Like they can see that where the set ends and the visual effect starts. But I think that Man of Steel was a great example of really, really wonderful, very trained people making the project together. And I really enjoyed working on that one.
Okay, now we're close, but I'm hoping we have time for one more. From Andrew, he says, Margot, I love the idea of taking inspiration from other creative works, like your example of the carpets for hotels set from The Shining. Do you ever find it difficult to determine at what point to pull back and make it your own, but still nail the homage?
Oh, absolutely. And again, another great question. I think that's always the thing. I always feel like we are aiming to create something original. And if we are already finding all of our references in other film and TV projects, we're kind of behind the 8 ball on that. So I think finding that line is an important one. In this instance, we didn't copy the exact carpet, but we looked at the carpet. We thought, oh, everyone's referring to this carpet as a wonderful thing. So we went, okay, strong graphic, bright colors, can't miss it. Doesn't quite look like it belongs in a hotel, but it's not absolutely outrageous. So I think sometimes a reference is important for sort of finding the line between reality and fantasy, but not copying exactly.
Right, okay. Let me see. And somebody else had said, it might be too long an answer. Okay, how did you achieve the amazing sets on the BFG?
Oh, good question. I'll answer really quickly. The BFG, we built a lot of the sets physically, but then they ended up getting scanned by the visual. I've never seen this before. It's a unique project. Basically, the visual effects department LiDAR scanned our sets and brought them into the computer because there were so many giants and set extensions that we built physical sets for actors to act in, but they effectively became part of the visual effects department who had to meld them with extensions to it. So it was really fascinating that way. a longer topic for another day. But there might be an article about that online somewhere, actually.
Great. Okay.
Great.
Well, we're going to have to say goodbye to Margot. Thank you for stepping in
Thank you so much.
launching our day off so perfectly.
Okay. Thank you.
We look forward to following your work in the future.
Okay.
So
Take care, everybody. Bye.
MargotReady.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.